She had waited for him to look at her, truly look at her, for 3 long years. But on that cold autumn morning, Lady Lillian Greystone finally stopped waiting. The breakfast room at Ashford Hall was filled with pale sunlight and silence. Lillian sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her untouched plate growing cold before her. She had arranged fresh roses in the crystal vase, had asked the cook to prepare his favorite honey cakes, had worn the soft blue gown the housekeeper once said brought color to her cheeks. The door opened and he walked in. Alexander Greystone, the Duke of Ashford, did not glance at the roses. He did not notice the honey cakes. His dark eyes swept the room as if she were part of the furniture, and then he spoke, his voice low and utterly indifferent. "I will take coffee in my study. I have no time for breakfast." Lillian's lips parted, but before a single word could leave them, he turned and walked out, his boots echoing down the marble corridor until the sound faded into nothing. She sat there, alone, the steam from her tea curling upward like a wish she could no longer make. For 3 years she had tried to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. She had remembered every small detail he ever mentioned, had learned the names of his tenants, had smiled through countless dinners where he spoke only to others. She had hoped, with the quiet desperation of a woman who believed love could bloom even in barren soil. But soil cannot bloom without water, and Alexander Greystone had given her nothing but dust. Later that day, she stood at her window and watched him ride out across the gray fields on his black stallion. He did not turn back. He never did. And for the first time in 3 years, Lillian did not stand there hopping he would. She stepped away from the window, picked up a shawl, and walked out into the gardens alone. The gardens of Ashford Hall had been neglected for over a decade. Once they had been the pride of the county, a sprawling tapestry of rose arbors, herb beds, and sun-drenched pathways. Now they were tangled, overgrown, forgotten, much like the Duchess herself. Lillian found a small stone bench near the old greenhouse and sat down. The air smelled of damp earth and dying leaves. She pulled her shawl tighter and let the silence wrap around her. It was strange, she thought, how loneliness could become so familiar it almost felt like a friend. A footstep crunched on the gravel, and she turned. A tall young man with kind brown eyes and a worn leather satchel stood a few paces away. He was not dressed like a gentleman, but his manner held a quiet dignity. He bowed respectfully. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I did not mean to intrude. I am Nicholas Ashby, the new estate steward. I was told to survey the grounds." Lillian offered a small, tired smile. "You are not intruding, Mr. Ashby. These gardens could use someone's attention. No one has cared for them in years." Nicholas glanced at the tangled roses. "It would be a privilege to restore them, if Her Grace would permit. I studied botany before I took this post." Something flickered in Lillian's chest. Not hope, not yet, just a fragile spark of interest. "I would like that," she said softly. "Perhaps I could help." And so the quiet revolution began. Weeks passed. Lillian spent her mornings in the greenhouse with Nicholas, their hands buried in soil, coaxing life from dead roots. He never asked why the Duke's wife had time to garden, never pried into her sadness. He simply handed her a trowel and spoke of seeds and sunlight until, for a few hours each day, she forgot she was invisible. But the world outside the greenhouse did not forget. One afternoon, Lillian attended a small tea at the home of Lady Whitmore, a sharp-tongued matron who ruled the local society. The room was filled with elegant women, their silks rustling like whispered secrets. Lillian sat quietly, sipping her tea, until Lady Whitmore turned to her with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We so rarely see you, Duchess. One might forget Ashford Hall has a mistress at all." Laughter rippled around the room, delicate and cutting. "My husband keeps me quite content at home," Lillian replied evenly. "Does he?" Lady Whitmore's fan fluttered. "I heard His Grace dined at Lord Harrow's estate last week and danced until dawn. But of course, A wife would know her husband's habits better than I. Lillian's teacup trembled in her hand. She had not known. He had told her he had business in the next county. She had believed him. She set the cup down, stood gracefully, and smiled a smile she had perfected over 3 years. "Thank you for a lovely afternoon, Lady Whitmore. I must return home." She walked out with her spine straight and her heart shattering. That evening, Lillian sat alone in her chambers, a single candle burning beside her. She did not cry. Tears had long since dried up. Instead, she looked at herself in the mirror and made a silent vow. She would no longer wait for love that would never come. She would no longer shape her days around a man who shaped his around her absence. She would become someone she herself could respect. The very next morning, Lillian began to change. She did not prepare his honey cakes. She did not wait in the breakfast room. She rose early, dressed in a simple wool gown, and walked down to the village. She visited the widow who ran the bookshop, the blacksmith's wife who was expecting her 5th child, the old farmer whose roof had collapsed in the last storm. She listened. She helped. She gave what she could, not of coin, but of herself. And slowly the village began to see her, not as the Duke's forgotten wife, but as Lady Lillian. The first time Alexander noticed something was different. It was an ordinary Tuesday. He returned from a long ride, mud-spattered and weary, and found the great hall empty. No fire crackling, no tea waiting. He frowned. In the past, Lillian had always been there, hovering at the edge of his vision, eager to welcome him home. He had never acknowledged it, but now its absence irritated him. He found her in the library, her head bent over a ledger, her fingers ink-stained. "Lillian," he said. She looked up, and for a heartbeat he saw something new in her eyes. Distance. "Yes, Alexander. Where is my tea?" She blinked, then set her quill down. "The kitchen is fully staffed. I'm sure Mrs. Dalton can prepare it for you." He stared at her as if she had spoken a foreign language. Before he could respond, she stood, gathered her papers, and walked past him, leaving only the faint scent of lavender in her wake. Alexander stood motionless in the empty library, a strange, uncomfortable feeling coiling in his chest. He told himself it was irritation, nothing more. But it was not irritation that kept him awake that night, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way she had not looked back. The weeks that followed were a quiet war of shifting ground. Lillian no longer sought his company. She no longer asked about his day. She was polite, gracious, perfectly correct, and utterly unreachable. She spent more time in the village, organizing a fund to repair the church roof, teaching the baker's daughter to read, sitting with the elderly and the lonely. In the afternoons, she worked in the greenhouse, her laughter occasionally drifting through the gardens as Nicholas Ashby explained the secret language of orchids. Alexander, watching from his study window, felt his jaw tighten. He did not understand the feeling. It was hot and cold all at once, a restless unease that gnawed at the edges of his composure. He told himself he was merely concerned about propriety. A duchess should not be digging in the dirt with a steward. It was unseemly, that was all. But when he saw Nicholas hand Lillian a bloom and saw her smile, a smile she had never once given him, something dark and possessive flared in his chest. He turned from the window, his hands clenched into fists. That evening he sent for Nicholas Ashby. The steward stood before him in the study, his expression calm but watchful. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his voice cold as winter iron. "Mr. Ashby, your duties are extensive. I suggest you devote your time to the estate accounts and leave the gardens to the groundskeeper." Nicholas did not flinch. "Her Grace requested my assistance, Your Grace. I saw no harm." "I did not ask your opinion. I gave an instruction." A long silence stretched between them. Then Nicholas inclined his head. "As you wish, Your Grace." He left, and Alexander sat alone in the darkening room, the taste of victory strangely bitter on his tongue. The next day, Lillian discovered Nicholas had been reassigned. She said nothing. She simply put on her bonnet and walked to the greenhouse alone. That night, Alexander found her in the drawing room, mending one of her old gowns. The firelight softened her features, but her stillness was unsettling. She did not look up when he entered. "You sent Mr. Ashby away," she said quietly. "His place is not in the gardens. His place was where I asked him to be, but you wouldn't understand that." He crossed the room, frustration simmering. "Lillian." She finally looked at him, and the quiet weight of her gaze stopped him cold. "I have asked so little of you. I have endured coldness, silence, humiliation. And I endured it because I believed, foolishly, that one day you might see me. But I will not endure cruelty toward a man who showed me simple kindness." Her voice did not shake. Her eyes did not fill with tears. She was not the trembling, hopeful girl he had married. She was a woman who had learned to stand without him. And in that moment, Alexander felt the first crack in the ice around his heart. It frightened him more than anything had in years. He left the room without a word. The turning point came on a storm-lashed night in early winter. Lillian had been spending her evenings in the old attic, sorting through decades of forgotten trunks and dusty papers. It was there, beneath a crumbling stack of legal documents, that she found a leather-bound ledger and a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. The letters were from her father, written in the months before his death. They spoke of betrayal, of forged signatures, of a plot orchestrated by Alexander's own uncle, Lord Reginald Greystone, to destroy the Hartwell family and claim their shipping fortune. Her father had been innocent, framed, ruined. And the ledger proved it. Lillian read until her candle burned down to a stub, her hands trembling. Her father had died a disgraced pauper. Her mother had faded away from grief. And all the while, the real villain had sat in Ashford Hall, welcomed as family, while she was treated as the daughter of a thief. A cold, burning resolve settled in her bones. She would not let this stand. She would clear her father's name, no matter the cost. She did not notice the locket slip from her pocket as she gathered the papers. It fell silently onto the dusty floorboards, its silver chain gleaming in the weak light. Inside it was a tiny painted portrait of a boy with dark curls, and on the back an inscription, "To my Lily, I will wait forever." She had carried it since she was 7 years old, a relic of a friendship that had once been her whole world. But she had not looked at it in years. It hurt too much to remember the boy who had promised to love her, only to forget she ever existed. She left the attic, her heart a storm of grief and fury. The next morning, Lillian rode out alone to the magistrate's town, the evidence tucked into her cloak. She would expose Lord Reginald's crimes publicly, even if it meant dragging the Greystone name through scandal. Alexander would hate her for it, but she no longer needed his love. She needed the truth. The sky darkened as she traveled, rain lashing the narrow road. The wind howled through the trees and her horse grew skittish. She pressed on, her mind fixed on her purpose, until a sudden crack of thunder spooked the animal and the world tilted violently. She was thrown. Pain exploded through her side as she hit the muddy ground, and then everything went black. Alexander received word an hour later. A farmer had found her, unconscious and bleeding on the forest road. The sound that tore from his throat was not a word. It was something raw and primal, a cry he had not known he was capable of. He rode out into the storm without a coat, without thought, terror clawing at his chest. He found her in a small cottage where the farmer's wife was tending her wounds. Lillian lay pale and still, a gash on her temple, her breathing shallow. Alexander knelt beside the narrow bed and took her cold hand in his. "Lillian," he whispered, his voice breaking, "don't you dare leave me, not now, not ever." He had not said her name with tenderness in 3 years. He had not said it at all if he could avoid it. But now it was a prayer. The farmer's wife gently pressed a cloth to Lillian's head. "She were clutching these, your grace. wouldn't let go even in her faint. She handed him the bundle of papers and the silver locket. Alexander's hands shook as he opened the locket. The painted face of a boy stared back at him, his own face, from a miniature his mother had commissioned when he was 10, and the inscription, "To my Lily, I will wait forever." He had called her Lily. She had been the wild, laughing girl next door, the one he had promised to marry, the one who had vanished when the scandal broke and her family was destroyed. He had been told she died of fever a year later. But she had not died. She had been here, his wife, his forgotten, lonely wife. The realization hit him like a blade. All those years, he had blamed her family for his father's suffering. He had married her out of cold duty, punishing her for sins she never committed. He had starved her of warmth, of touch, of simple human kindness. And all the while, she had been the girl who once held his hand in the orchard and promised to love him until the stars went out. The papers slipped from his fingers, the ledger falling open to the damning evidence against Lord Reginald. Alexander read the truth in a haze of shame. His uncle, the man he had trusted, had stolen her father's name, her family's fortune, and then let her bear the weight of disgrace. Alexander had been the instrument of her suffering. He pressed his forehead to her hand and wept. Lillian woke 3 days later in her own bed at Ashford Hall, weak and bandaged. The first face she saw was Alexander's, haggard and unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. He was sitting beside her bed, clutching her hand as if she might dissolve. She tried to pull away, her memory of the betrayal still sharp. The papers. "I've read them," he said hoarsely. "I know everything." She stared at him, waiting for his cold dismissal, his anger. Instead, he lifted the locket, dangling gently from his fingers. "You were Lily," he whispered. "My Lily, and I didn't see you. I had you in my home, at my table, and I was too blind to recognize the only person I ever truly loved." Lillian's throat tightened. "You never loved me. You married a stranger." "I married a memory I was too much of a coward to face. I was taught to hate the name Hartwell. But you," he closed his eyes, pain etched into every line of his face. "You were never a stranger. You were the girl who taught me how to laugh, and I repaid you with silence." A tear slipped down her cheek, the first she had allowed herself in years. "I stopped hoping, Alexander. I don't know if I can hope again." He lifted her hand to his lips, his kiss warm against her knuckles. "Then don't hope. Let me hope for both of us. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of the girl who carried my locket through all that darkness." The days that followed were strange and fragile. Alexander did not rush her. He did not demand forgiveness. He simply stayed. He brought her tea, read to her from her favorite books, sat beside her in the greenhouse while she healed. He dismissed Lord Reginald publicly, clearing her father's name and restoring her family's honor with a proclamation read in every village square. And slowly, like a garden after a long winter, Lillian began to feel the faint warmth of something she had thought long dead. One evening she walked with him to the greenhouse, where the first winter roses had bloomed. The air was cold and crisp, and the stars were just beginning to appear. Alexander turned to her, his eyes full of a tenderness she had never seen before. "I loved you too late," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I love you with everything I have, and I will love you until my last breath, whether you ever say it back or not." Lillian looked at the man who had been a stranger, an enemy, a ghost of a lost boy. She saw the cracks in his armor, the vulnerability he had finally let show. And she felt her heart, battered but not broken, stir. She reached up and touched his cheek. "It's not too late," she said softly. "The boy in the locket kept his promise. He waited forever, and so did I." He gathered her into his arms, and for a long moment they simply held each other, two souls who had wandered through a long, dark winter and finally found the spring. The gardens of Ashford Hall bloomed the following year as they never had before. The village spoke of the Duke and Duchess walking hand in hand along the repaired pathways, of the laughter that drifted from the open windows, of the way His Grace looked at his wife as if she were the sun itself. And in the greenhouse, among the roses they had revived together, there hung a small silver locket, its chain catching the light, a quiet reminder that some love stories are not lost. They are simply waiting to be found.